Welcome back to the channel, folks. Today we're going to be doing some more Dominaria United previews. Let's begin with the person in the background, Braids, a risen nightmare. For 1 black, you get a 3/3 legendary creature Nightmare. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you get to draw a card. For anybody who had the pleasure of playing with the original Braids, this is kind of a throwback for that card. The original Braids was a 2/2 for 2 and 2 black that said at the beginning of each player's upkeep, they had to sacrifice a creature, an artifact, or a land to her. That was kind of a very, I don't know how you want to call it, very stacksy version of Braids. This one being that it's a May, it doesn't lock your opponents down. However, they do get punished for 2 life and a card if they don't want to do the sacrifices, making this somewhat more flexible and not as punishing. But all in all, I really like the new Braids and I can't wait to build some things around her. Next up, we have Sphinx of Clear Skies. For 3 blue, you get a 5/5 Sphinx. It's a mythic. It says Flying Ward 2, and it has Domain. If you don't know what Domain is, Domain looks at your basic land types, and then it does an effect. In this case, whenever Sphinx of Clear Skies deals combat damage to a player, reveal the X top cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard. This is basically Fact or Fiction on a stick. You cast Fact or Fiction for 3 and a blue at instant speed. Your opponent looks at the top 5 cards, splits them into 2 piles, and you get to pick one of them and put it in your hand. The other ones go to your graveyard. This is the same thing, but it's tied into how many basic land types you have. So if you even have just 1 basic land type, you get a card, because they can separate the piles, because the piles can be empty here. So you go, okay, it's 1 card, 1 pile's empty, and 1 pile has the card. You get the card, the empty pile goes to the graveyard. So regardless of how many lands you're playing or land types you have in play, you're getting something out of this hitting somebody. And it has a protection clause on it with the ward 2. This is probably going to see play as a control finisher of some sort, because it's a little bit harder to kill and it gets you card advantage in the grand scheme of things. I would look out for this card. This should do some good damage in the standard environment and probably see a little bit of play, especially in like Uthun decks in Commander. Next up, we have what I would call a tooth and nail wannabe. We have the World spell. For 5 green. You get an enchantment saga with read ahead. It says, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-saga permanent card from among them and put it in your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. That's chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 3 is put up to 2 non-saga permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So if you don't know anything about how Tooth and Nail works, you got to search your deck for 2 cards, or put 2 creature cards, I should say, or put 2 creatures from your hand onto the battlefield. But then you could entwine for 2 additional mana and look them up out of your deck and put them onto the battlefield. So in this case, you're looking at the top 7 twice, getting 2 creatures possibly. In this case, it's actually permanents rather than creatures. And then you get to slam the 2 at the end. Or maybe you've already drawn your targets that you want to do. You just do read ahead, go straight to chapter 3 and wing them on the board. This is probably a little too expensive for standard. No way is this playable in Pioneer or Modern, but in Commander, we're going to see play with this. People love doing tooth and nail and that kind of stuff, so this is going to see some sort of play there. Here we have the Golden Argosy. For 4 colorless, you get a legendary artifact vehicle. It's a 3/6. Whenever Golden Argosy attacks, exile each creature that crewed it this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Crew for 1. So the idea here is you crew it, you get a 3/6 vanilla creature for all intents and purposes, and then when it attacks, it'll exile whatever was crewed, and at the end of the turn it'll come back. So say you're wanting to wipe the board, but you want to save your best creature. Use it to crew this, swing with it, it'll exile, you nuke the board. This will die as part of it, but you'll get your best creature back and everything else will be gone. Alternatively, maybe you want to reuse enters the battlefield effects. You can grab something that destroys a creature when it comes into the battlefield, or draws you cards, or whatever. You would crew it with this, and then you swing and bounce it out of play, and then it comes back and you get your next ATB all over again. This is going to see some sort of play in Commander for sure. I'm not 100% sold on it being used in Standard, but we'll see. Not seeing it in any other formats though. Next up is Chaotic Transformation. For 5 in a red, you get a sorcery in red that says exile up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, up to 1 target enchantment, up to 1 target planeswalker, and or up to 1 target land. Each permanent exiled this way, its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a card of the type that was exiled, and then puts that card on the battlefield, then shuffles. This is basically like super chaos warp. You're essentially going to hit up a bunch of stuff, and you can either use it offensively or defensively. You can use it to get rid of a bunch of your opponent's stuff that's troublesome, and then it's gone for the rest of the game, and then they just flip up stuff off the top of their deck, which is great because, hey, chaotic, you could use it as a chaos card, or you can use it on your own side of the board, hit up a bunch of stuff that you have. And don't forget, artifacts, these types are actually, if they're shared, you can kind of hit up multiple things, like an artifact creature versus a creature. So you can say, oh, this is my artifact and this is my creature, and then you can actually flip up maybe another artifact creature or a different artifact, but still nuke a creature doing it. Somebody brought up the use of Hinata Dawn Crown with this, because you're getting multiple targets with it, because you're going to get, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you got 4 targets, and so it's going to reduce the cost of this by 4 if you have a Hinata out. This is definitely going to see play in Commander of some sort. I don't know if it's going to make it in Standard. Hinata is cute and everything, but it's kind of expensive for what it does. Next up, we have Erborg Repossession, which is basically Raise Dead, but it has some bonuses attached to it. For a black, you get a sorcery with kicker 1 and a green. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You gain 2 life. If the spell was kicked, return another permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. What's nice about this is, if you want to use it just to get a creature back, you can, and you gain 2 life. But if you throw in the 1 and a green part of the kicker, you can get any other permanent from your graveyard. It doesn't have to be another creature. You can go get an enchantment or an artifact that might have gotten destroyed. So I feel this is going to see play, especially in Commander. I feel it's going to get used. Hell, it's going to get used in Pauper probably, since it's a common. Probably going to see a little bit of play in Standard. It may even see some play maybe in Pioneer if there's some kind of deck that can use it. Next up, we have Najal The Stormrunner. For 2 blue red, you get a 5/4 legendary creature, Efreet Wizard. You may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash, and whenever he attacks, you may pay 2 colorless. If you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it, and you can choose new targets for the copy. A little expensive for what it is. You're not gonna, unless it's late game when you cast it, you're not gonna be able to have enough mana to actually do anything with this the turn it comes into play, and it has to survive long enough to actually attack to get the copying part of it. But the being able to cast sorcery spells as flash is very powerful. It's nothing to sneeze at. Just ask Teferi Time Reveler about that one. But if you get to untap with this, this has a very powerful effect. You get to swing with a 5/4, which is pretty good size on its own. You pay 2, and then you can copy the next thing you have coming out. So in Standard, think Lightning Strike. You can swing with it, and then you can pay 2, and then you go and you copy a Lightning Strike, and you have 6 direct damage coming at somebody. Or maybe that Chaotic Transformation that I pointed out a couple cards ago. You can actually instant speed cast that and take out some of their stuff, or transform your things after he's attacked you. Maybe you want to transform him into something else because he's going to die on the attack or something like that. There's possibilities here, but he's kind of in the between zone. He definitely might see play in Commander. Standard, I don't see him seeing play. I think he's just a little too slow, and if he's too slow there, he's too slow everywhere else in Constructed. Next up, we have Defiler of Vigor. For 3 green, you get a Phyrexian Worm with Trample. It's a 6/6, and as an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life, Phyrexian mana. Those spells cost green less to cast if you paid life in this way. This effect only reduces green mana that you pay. Whenever you cast a green permanent spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This thing is pretty dang powerful. It's already undercosted as a 5 casting 6/6 with Trample. It gives Phyrexian mana to 1 green mana pip when you cast your next spell, and then you can do that with whatever. So A good line of play here would be to play Defiler or Vigor, and then say you have an Elvish Mystic in your hand or something of that nature in Commander, or even in Pioneer. You pay the 2 life, cast that Mystic, and then all of your stuff gets +1/+1, including this thing, so all of a sudden it becomes a 7/7 trampler the turn it comes into play. And if you're playing green, you might actually be able to ramp right into this thing to get it out a turn earlier. It's going to see play in Commander for sure, because +1/+1 counter decks are loved by the player base. It's probably going to see play in Standard in some way, shape, or form. I know I'm going to try to make the damn thing work. And other formats, I'm not so sure, but we'll see what happens. Here we have Aster, Bearer of Blades. For 2 red-white, you get a human warrior 4/4 that says, when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 7 cards of your library, reveal an equipment or a vehicle card among them, and put it into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Equipment you control have equip 1, and vehicles you control have crew. This is kinda nutty. This card makes some of the most unplayable vehicles and equipment very playable. Think Colossus Hammer, and think of all the things that have exorbitant equip costs or exorbitant crew costs. This guy hits the board, it costs 1 to equip, some god-awful thing. Helm of the Host. Okay, it doesn't equip for 5 anymore, it's 1. Vehicles you control have crew 1. You can crew some of the most absurd stuff with your creatures with him and go to town. I get the feeling that this is going to see at least a 1 or 2 of in Mardu Greasefang in Pioneer, just to kind of cover the deck's butt a little bit and make it so things are kind of get hairy there. And like I said, in Commander, this thing is going to definitely see some kind of play because you can get these equip costs way down. All in all, I'm impressed. I don't know that I'm going to see it as a Commander face card, but it's definitely going to be a part of some kind of red-white X deck in Commander. This spell I want to point out is because of Pauper. I think this is going to see a lot of play there, and it might even see some constructed play. Writhing Necromass for 6 and a black. It's a 5/5 zombie giant with Death Touch that says it costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. So, in a self-mill strategy or an aristocrat strategy where you're just slamming your creatures and letting them die over and over, this thing can get pretty cheap. It's kind of akin to the Gurmag Angler, where you could delve the cards out of your graveyard to cast it on the cheap. This thing might actually see some play in a deck similar to that, and I'd like to see what it can do. Next up, we have one of my favorite cards I've seen so far, Nimana, Primeval Warden. For 2 black-green, you get a legendary creature Tree Folk, a 3/4 with Reach, that has, if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead, and when you do, create a 1/1 Sapperling token. Then you can also pay a green, sack a Sapperling. This gets +2/+2 until end of turn, or 1 and a black, sack 2 Sapperlings, draw a card. I really liked the Slimefoot decks that came out of the original Dominaria and have, kind of a soft spot for those kind of things. This kind of takes it up to another level. It has an ability very similar to Kalida's Trader of Get, where it exiles your opponent's creatures as they die, and then gives you a token instead. But then it also has activated abilities that play off of those tokens to do various things, like pump him up to start slamming your opponent, and or make it bigger to catch things that are trying to fly through and hit you. Or if you have extra things that are either dying in combat or you're chump blocking with, you can sack them to draw cards and refill. This is going to see some play, I think, especially in Commander, but this might even see constructed format play. It's actually pretty strong for what it is. Next up, we have an uncommon, Cult Conscript. For a black, you get a 2/1 Skeleton Warrior. It enters the battlefield tapped. The reason I like to point it out, though, is the ability attached to it. For 1 and a black, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only if a non-skeleton creature died under your control this turn. Things that can come back out of the graveyard, if you have ways of controlling how that happens, are very strong, especially in good formats where you can kind of build combos around them. So Commander, this is a very good piece of fodder to sacrifice to something and bring back over and over and over again if you have ways to control it. I'd have to wait and see what comes out of the rest of the set for Standard to see if there's any kind of way to really take advantage of this, but I would keep an eye on this thing for a lot of different formats. It could be a very good card. Next up is Tori the Avenant Fury Rider. For 1 red, red, white, we have an uncommon human knight, a 3/3, with vigilance and trample. Whenever she attacks, all other attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So she's basically an anthem on a stick when she attacks. Other red attacking creatures you control gain trample until end of turn. Untap each other white attacking creature. So essentially she gives trample to the red and gives your white creatures vigilance. They'll tap and then they'll untap. She's got a pertinent creature type with Knight, so we could see maybe like a red-white Knight deck in Commander, and you might even see it in Historic Brawl as well, because there's plenty of Knights and stuff kicking around from the original Dominaria block, and there's more Knights coming with this set, obviously. So I'm not sure it'll see much constructed play for Standard or anything like that, but I'd keep an eye on it for Commander and Historic Brawl for sure. Here we have Karn Living Legacy. For 4 colorless, you get a legendary planeswalker Karn, starting loyalty 4. +1, create a tapped Power Stone token. It's an artifact with tap, add a colorless. The mana from it cannot be spent to cast a non-artifact spell, but you can use it to activate abilities of non-artifact things on the board. -1, pay any amount of mana, look at that many cards from the top of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom in a random order. I'm not real keen on this ability because you have to have open mana to actually use it, so it kind of slows down the progress of your board because you're going to have to spend mana to actually use it. But that said, in later game, this is quite powerful because then you can start dumping mana into it to dig for answers or dig for like a win con or something like that. So early game, not so good. Late game, very powerful. And then we have the -7. You get an emblem with tap and untapped artifact you control. This emblem deals 1 damage to any target. So you've been creating tap Power Stones. You've created at least 3 of them to get him up to the 7. Plus whatever other artifacts. So you're probably going to play this in an artifact-centric deck anyways. So then basically you turn all of your artifacts into Timmies and just start zapping everything. You kill creatures, you can kill your opponents, whatever. This card's going to see play. I don't know how good it's going to be in Constructed until I see the rest of the incoming artifacts. May not be as good until the Brothers War comes out, which is going to be a more artifact-centric set. But that said, this is something to keep an eye on. It's probably going to go down in cost because it's not going to see a lot of play at first. And then once the preceding sets come into this storyline, I think this card's going to go up in value and also see a lot more play. Here is the talk of the Commander community. Plaza of Heroes. It's a land that taps for a colorless on its own. It also taps for 1 mana of any color, but you can only spend that on a legendary spell. But that includes any kind of legendary creatures, legendary artifacts, or legendary spells from the original Dominaria set. It taps to add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control. So if you already have a legendary creature out, like your commander, you can tap to add 1 mana of any color. So it's great color fixing. Or you can pay 3 and tap it, exile this land, target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So it's got a failsafe to protect like your commanders or whatever. It's going to see play in Standard probably too. There's probably going to be some kind of legendary centric type deck out there. I'm not sure where, but this card's probably going to see play. It may even see play if there's like some kind of weird Bard class deck that's going to rotate into Pioneer here shortly. It may even see some play there if that exists. Next up is Aaron Benellias Ruin. White, white, black for a 3/3 legendary creature, Phyrexian human. Has menace and also has black, white, tap, sacrifice another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Again, as I said earlier, +1/+1 counter decks are very popular in Commander, so this is probably going to see some kind of play. I don't know how much it's going to see play as its own Commander because black and white aren't really great with +1/+1 counters. That's kind of more the province of green. However, if there is a Abzan or some other variation with green in it with this deck, Atraxa, this card is probably going to slot into one of those decks and become very, very good. In Standard, not sure where it's going to go. Probably a pretty good card in Limited, though, to bulk up your armies and stuff. Throw some tokens under the bus and make your stuff bigger. So we'll have to keep an eye on Aaron here and see what happens. Next up is Threats Undetected. For 2 and a green, you get a sorcery that says search your library for up to 4 creature cards with different powers and then reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Shuffle the chosen cards into your library and the rest go to your hand. This is kind of in the vein of Gifts Ungiven, which is banned in Commander, but this is a little different. Rather than looking for 4 different named cards, you look for 4 different powers. So this is probably going to see a little bit of play in Standard and maybe some other formats as well. Commander, it'll definitely see some sort of play. It's kind of good because then you can search up, different stuff. You can play some different things there. I just don't know how much play it's gonna see. It's very good, but then it's also giving your opponent a lot of license to control what you're getting off of it. So we'll see what happens there. This card's gonna see some Commander play for sure. It's Shauna Purifying Blade. For green, white, blue, you get a legendary creature, Human Warrior, a 3/3 with lifelink. And at the beginning of your end step, you may pay X. If you do, draw X cards. X cannot be greater than the amount of life you gain this turn. So rather than a mono white or a green white life gain deck, we now have a Bant life gain deck, which actually kind of plays into the Brokers Guild a little bit with their +1 counters, their shield counters, and stuff like that. So you can kind of protect Shauna. I think my only disappointment here is in the lore. She is, said to have, magic resistance, and this card has 0 magic resistance. So it's kind of a funny thing there. But all in all, I think this is going to see play in a lot of formats. Like I said, Commander probably will see a little bit of play in Standard, and I'm not sure about everything else. The last card of the day, and I just found this on another site when I was digging around, Defiler of Faith. For 3 white, you get a 5/5 Phyrexian human with vigilance that says, as an additional cost to cast white permanent spells, you can pay 2 life. Those spells cost white less to cast if you paid life this way, and it only reduces the amount of white mana that you pay. Whenever you cast a white permanent, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So this is the white Defiler from the cycle. We're just missing the red and the black. It's a 5/5 for 5 with vigilance. That's pretty good on its own, but not really anything to write home about as a rare. However, if you're being able to cast things with the Phyrexian mana costs and you start playing with like little low to the ground creatures, you can actually start flooding the board with little 1/1 soldier tokens and be like, okay, play him, pay 2, drop a 1-drop creature, and then get a 1/1 creature token to go with it. This thing could definitely overrun the board really quick, and it's also kind of interesting because it actually interacts very well with the worm that I talked about earlier, because then you can play white stuff and then you can play the green and pump those creatures up. So there could be some kind of weird like green-white mess with those 2 in it. We'll have to wait and see what happens. That's all for today's spoilers that I missed over the weekend. If you like what I'm doing here, please like, comment, subscribe, and all that good fun stuff. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.